Then she said to him, "As you will not stay, take this little golden rod as a remembrance of me. It has the power to become anything you wish it to be when you are in need." So the prince thanked her, and putting the rod in his pocket, went his way. Scarcely had he left the town behind him when he came to a broad river which no man might pass, for he was standing at the end of the world, and this was the river which flowed round it. Not knowing what to do next, he walked a little distance up the bank, and there, over his head, a beautiful city was floating in the air. He longed to get to it, but how? Neither road nor bridge was anywhere to be seen, yet the city drew him upwards, and he felt that here at last was the country which he sought. Suddenly he remembered the golden rod which the mist-veiled queen had given him. With a beating heart he flung it to the ground, wishing with all his might that it should turn into a bridge, and fearing that, after all, this might prove beyond its power. But no, instead of the rod, there stood a golden ladder leading straight up to the city of the air. He was about to enter the golden gates when there sprang at him a wondrous beast whose like he had never seen. "Out sword from the sheath!" cried the prince, springing back with a cry, and the sword leapt from the scabbard and cut off some of the monster's heads. But others grew again directly, so that the prince, pale with terror, stood where he was, calling for help, and put his sword back in the sheath again. The queen of the city heard the noise, and looked from her window to see what was happening. Summoning one of her servants, she bade him go and rescue the stranger and bring him to her. The prince thankfully obeyed her orders and entered her presence. The moment she looked at him, the queen also felt that he was no ordinary man, and she welcomed him graciously and asked him what had brought him to the city. In answer, the prince told all his story, and how he had traveled long and far in search of the land of immortality. "You have found it," said she, "for I am queen over life and over death. Here you can dwell among the immortals." 1,000 years had passed since the prince first entered the city, but they had flown so fast that the time seemed no more than 6 months. There had not been one instant of the 1,000 years that the prince was not happy, till one night when he dreamed of his father and mother. Then the longing for his home came upon him with a rush, and in the morning he told the queen of the immortals that he must go and see his father and mother once more. The queen stared at him with amazement and cried, "Why, prince, are you out of your senses? It is more than 800 years since your father and mother died. There will not even be their dust remaining." "I must go all the same," said he. "Well, do not be in a hurry," continued the queen, understanding that he would not be prevented. "Wait till I make some preparations for your journey." So she unlocked her great treasure chest and took out 2 beautiful flasks, one of gold and one of silver, which she hung around his neck. Then she showed him a little trap door in one corner of the room and said, "Fill the silver flask with this water, which is below the trap door. It is enchanted, and whoever you sprinkle with the water will become a dead man at once, even if he had lived 1,000 years. The golden flask you must fill with the water here," she added, pointing to a well in another corner. "It springs from the rock of eternity. You have only to sprinkle a few drops on a body, and it will come to life again, if it had been dead 1,000 years." The prince thanked the queen for her gifts, and bidding her farewell, went on his journey. He soon arrived in the town where the mist-veiled queen reigned in her palace, but the whole city had changed, and he could scarcely find his way through the streets. In the palace itself all was still, and he wandered through the rooms without meeting anyone to stop him. At last he entered the queen's own chamber, and there she lay, with her embroidery still in her hands, fast asleep. He pulled at her dress, but she did not waken. Then a dreadful idea came over him, and he ran to the chamber where the needles had been kept, but it was quite empty. The queen had broken the last over the work she held in her hand, and with it the spell was broken too, and she lay dead. Quick as thought, the prince pulled out the golden flask and sprinkled some drops of the water over the queen. In a moment She moved gently, and raising her head, opened her eyes. "Oh, my dear friend, I am so glad you wakened me. I must have slept a long while." "You would have slept till eternity," answered the prince, "if I had not been here to waken you." At these words, the queen remembered about the needles. She knew now that she had been dead, and that the prince had restored her to life. She gave him thanks from her heart for what he had done, and vowed she would repay him if she ever got a chance. The prince took his leave, and set out for the country of the bald-headed king. As he drew near the place, he saw that the whole mountain had been dug away, and that the king was lying dead on the ground, his spade and bucket beside him. But as soon as the water from the golden flask touched him, he yawned and stretched himself and slowly rose to his feet. "Oh, my dear friend, I am so glad to see you," cried he. "I must have slept a long while." "You would have slept till eternity if I had not been here to waken you," answered the prince. And the king remembered the mountain and the spell, and vowed to repay the service if ever he had a chance. Farther along the road, which led to his old home, the prince found the great tree torn up by its roots, and the king of the eagles sitting dead on the ground, with his wings outspread as if for flight. A flutter ran through the feathers as the drops of water fell on them, and the eagle lifted his beak from the ground and said, "Oh, how long I must have slept! How can I thank you for having awakened me, my dear good friend?" "You would have slept till eternity if I had not been here to waken you," answered the prince. Then the king remembered about the tree, and knew that he had been dead, and promised if ever he had a chance to repay what the prince had done for him. At last he reached the capital of his father's kingdom, but on reaching the place where the royal palace had stood, instead of the marble galleries where he used to play, there lay a great sulphur lake, its blue flames darting into the air. How was he to find his father and mother and bring them back to life if they were lying at the bottom of that horrible water? He turned away sadly and wandered back into the streets, hardly knowing where he was going, when a voice behind him cried, "Stop, prince! I have caught you at last. It is 1,000 years since I first began to seek you." And there beside him stood the old, white-bearded figure of Death. Swiftly he drew the ring from his finger, and the king of the eagles, the bald-headed king, and the mist-veiled queen hastened to his rescue. In an instant they had seized upon Death and held him tight till the prince should have time to reach the land of immortality. But they did not know how quickly Death could fly, and the prince had only 1 foot across the border when he felt the other grasped from behind, and the voice of Death calling, "Halt now, you are mine." The queen of the immortals was watching from her window, and cried to Death that he had no power in her kingdom, and that he must seek his prey elsewhere. "Quite true," answered Death, "but his foot is in my kingdom, and that belongs to me." "At any rate, half of him is mine," replied the queen, "and what good can the other half do you? Half a man is no use either to you or to me. But this once I will allow you to cross into my kingdom, and we will decide by a wager whose he is." And so it was settled. Death stepped across the narrow line that surrounds the land of immortality, and the queen proposed the wager which was to decide the prince's fate. "I will throw him up into the sky," she said, "right to the back of the morning star, and if he falls down into the city, then he is mine. But if he should fall outside the walls, he shall belong to you." In the middle of the city was a great open square, and here the queen wished the wager to take place. When all was ready, she put her foot under the foot of the prince and swung him into the air. Up, up he went, high amongst the stars, and no man's eyes could follow him. Had she thrown him up straight? The queen wondered anxiously, for, if not, he would fall outside the walls, and she would lose him forever. The moments seemed long, while she and Death stood gazing up into the air, waiting to know whose prize the prince would be. Suddenly, They both caught sight of a tiny speck, no bigger than a wasp, right up in the blue. Was he coming straight? No. Yes. But as he was nearing the city, a light wind sprang up and swayed him in the direction of the wall. Another second, and he would have fallen half over it when the queen sprang forward, seized him in her arms, and flung him into the castle. Then she commanded her servants to cast Death out of the city, which they did with such hard blows that he never dared to show his face again in the land of Immortality. The End. Read by Rick Kessler.